Are we running ahead of schedule? There is a God. Oh. Though the only constant in life is change, we are hardwired to resist new challenges, preferring to remain within our comfort zones. Rather than adjust, we are willing to exist within our self-imposed boundaries, oftentimes at great emotional cost to ourselves and the world around us. To illustrate this point, I'll share with you a story. In the 1960s, President Eisenhower received the gift of a rare white tiger named Mohini. For years, Mohini lived in the Washington Zoo and spent her days pacing back and forth in a 12 by 12-foot cage. Finally, the zoo decided to build her a larger enclosure so that Mohini could run and climb and jump and explore. But when Mohini arrived at her new home, she didn't rush out, eager to explore her new habitat. Rather, she marked off a 12 by 12-foot square for herself by the fence and paced there until her death, never enjoying the new opportunities available to her. Mohini exemplifies the classic conditioning most of us live within. Although she was a magnificent and powerful creature, Mohini was convinced that her place was a 12 by 12-foot enclosure. We all have the propensity to act like Mohini. Based on our conditioning, we create invisible cages for ourselves, limiting our lives within certain boundaries. Rosh Hashanah, the start of a new year, is a time to think about our lives, our behavior, and whether or not we are satisfied with the journey that we are on. And there are two aspects of these holy days, one ritual, the sounding of the shofar, and the other a metaphor, that is the book of life, which can help us cast aside our conditioned behavior and wake up to new possibilities. Rabbi Sarah Hurwitz, the first ordained female spiritual leader in the Orthodox movement, wrote about Mohini, the white tiger, and said, "We don't have to succumb to our internal imprisonment. Throughout the High Holy Days, we hear the shofar blast. Historically, the shofar signaled the release of slaves at the end of the Jubilee year. That sound should make us ask, what enslaves us? What weighs us down? What baggage do we hold on to? And then, time to let it go. The High Holy Days present us with the opportunity to break free from these self-imposed cages, to find our own route to freedom, and to live a life with renewed passion. A second tool for transformation comes from the oft-repeated image of God writing in a divine book the fate that awaits each of us in the coming year. We ask God to write us B'Sefer Chayim in the book of life, and we chant the words V'kodvenu B'Sefer HaChayim. May we all be inscribed in this book of blessing, sustenance, and peace, this book of life. So here's what I want to tell you. There may not actually be a book. And what the coming year has in store for us, that may actually have more to do with the decisions that we make than what God believes we deserve. So if we plan to continue living our lives, today is the day, a good time, to ask ourselves if we are content with the lives that we are living. Are we open to the expansiveness and the experiences that can challenge and transform us? Or are we pacing in 12 by 12-foot cages? Sometimes we take our prayers literally and perhaps reject them because we don't believe in a God who determines our destiny and writes our name in a big book. I believe that the image of a book is of vital importance because I do not take it literally. Rather, I understand it as a metaphor, and I believe that we know it is in our own hands, our own hopes, dreams, relationships, and deeds to enter our names into a book of life that we care a great deal about. Raise your hand if you are familiar with the name Bachya ibn Pakuda. Go ahead. Oh, we have one. I guess he's not as famous a 12th century Spanish philosopher as I thought. Oh well. But we have one. In any event, it was Bachya ibn Pekuda who said, "Days are scrolls. Write on them what you want to be remembered for." Now that is a memorable line, at least among the Bachya ibn Pekuda fans. Certainly an applicable teaching during these particular days when we are considering what our lives can take on and the pride that we feel and what we wish will be worth remembering in our actions, our deeds. Are we excited about what we have accomplished or about the parent or friend that we are to our families or to those around us? Are we trying to be better for our community? And in what ways are we involved in helping others and uplifting our neighbors? Are we allowing the riches of our tradition to be part of our lives? All of our endeavors and activities are but chapters in our book of life, and our dreams and our goals for the next year are now being written. Let me try again. Raise your hand if you have ever visited Vienna, Austria. Okay, more people have been to Vienna than know Bachya ibn Pekuda. We know that now. Vienna is a city to which I hope to travel someday. And when I do, one of the places that I plan to visit is the Judenplatz Holocaust Memorial, a memorial to the 65,000 Austrian Jews who were murdered in the Holocaust. The memorial, which opened 24 years ago this month, is also called the Nameless Library. You may have seen pictures of it. It is stark, it is imposing, very much out of character when compared to the Baroque art of the magnificent city that surrounds it. The outside surfaces of the memorial are a cast of library shelves turned inside out. The spines of the book, well, they face inward and are not visible. And so the titles of these volumes are unknown, and the contents of these books remain unrevealed. The shelves of the memorial appear to hold endless copies of the same edition, which represent the vast number of victims, as well as the concept of Jews being people of the book. It is challenging to think of these reverse-facing books in the context of a book of life, for the lives being recalled by this facade of bookshelves were all cut short. The memorial, wrote my colleague Rabbi Toba August, with its empty concrete library and unwritten books, reflects the 65,000 Jews of Austria whose innocent lives were taken too soon, victims who were not able to write their stories in their own books. The Nameless Library is empty. The stories of these men, women, and children of Austria were abruptly ended and almost forgotten. For their sake, and for ours, our stories must be worth telling. The disturbing memorial calls to mind a brilliant 18th century rabbi named Chaim ben Yitzchak of Volozhin. When he was young, he was not an ambitious student, and in fact, he told his parents one day that he no longer wanted to study, but would rather go to trade school and learn to be a shoemaker. He announced his decision to his parents, who reluctantly acquiesced. And that night, the young man had a dream. In it, he saw an angel holding a stack of beautiful books. "Whose books are those? Whose books are those?" he asked the angel. "They are yours," was the answer, "if you have the courage to write them." This dream changed the young man's life, and Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin was on his way to discovering that he was a scholar, a great scholar who would impact Jewish life for centuries to come. We are the authors of our own stories, and these holy days on which we visit the synagogue and have the time for contemplation that we rarely have during our harried lives, these provide us with the opportunity to consider what we can do and what we must do to ensure that our story is meaningful and purposeful and substantive, a reflection of not necessarily the people that we are today, but the people whom we wish to be. What a gift it is to be here today and to know that we have the blessing and the opportunity to write more stories in our own books. What a blessing to be alive for another year. We know better than to take this blessing for granted. It should not be lost on us that the sages selected from the book of books, our Torah, readings for these 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, stories demonstrating that the ability that we have to choose the direction of our own lives is infinite. Yesterday it was Hagar, with whom Abraham had his first son Ishmael, who faced a painful impasse in her life. She and Ishmael had been cast out of Abraham's home, and they wandered in the wilderness until their ration of water had run out. Hagar was certain that Ishmael would not survive, and she placed him under a bush and left him there alone so as not to witness his end. The Torah tells us that she began to weep, and Ishmael must have been weeping too, for God heard Ishmael's cries and opened Hagar's eyes so that she saw a well of water with which she was able to save Ishmael's life. Was it Hagar who saved Ishmael, or was it God? It was Hagar. She found the ability to see through her pain and discovered a well that had been there all along. And the Torah portrays this as divine intervention, but I believe it was her own strength, her own courage, her own faith that helped her to overcome her fear. And so her life story and the life story of Ishmael did not end. Like Hagar, we too are challenged to summon hidden strength in order to keep our stories going. That we know that in our personal lives and our professional lives and our spiritual lives call upon us to find the reservoirs of hope and compassion, of trust and experience, and certainly of faith to overcome the obstacles that life presents us with. In order to become who we are meant to be, we must overcome challenges that frighten us and embrace determination and hope. It isn't easy, but it is necessary if our book of life is to be consequential. Today we're confronted with the story of Abraham and his second son Isaac. Again, a parent is blind to the possibilities that lie before him, and a child's life is nearly sacrificed. From this episode, we come away with the understanding that blind faith is an irrational faith, and that our lives, our stories, cannot and must not be limited, reduced, or constrained by believing that we have no choice regarding our actions, for what we do will help us to recognize our full potential. Abraham did not have to sacrifice his son, and in fact, he came to that realization that it was not what God in fact demanded of him. Or we might say that it dawned on him that he had a choice, and that he had to make it there in that moment. The choice that he made that day, in that very second, determined that his story and Isaac's story had new possibilities once he was able to break free of the conventions of his time and move forward in a different direction. With Hagar and Abraham's examples before us, I want us to consider the choices that we might make in the new year that will enhance our own books of life. What are we here to find our resources, and what resources what each of us might call upon? What are those things that constrain us, norms and habits from which we hope to break free? Today and for the next 10 days through Yom Kippur, each of us has a task. We must ask ourselves important questions while the metaphorical book of life remains open. Am I where I have to be? Am I where my potential will allow me to be? Am I too content, or am I not content enough? Am I challenging myself as I should? How do I spend my time? Am I busy making meaningful memories or preoccupied with meaningless moments? In a wonderful book by Donald Miller called A Million Miles in 1,000 Years, the author, after writing a successful memoir, was approached by two filmmakers who wanted to edit his story and make a movie of his life. As he worked with them on the screenplay, he was distressed at how much was being changed, and he asked why, and he was told that his life was simply too boring for the screen. Miller knew in his heart that they were right. He spent the next year discovering how to make a meaningful movie and learned that a good story had to have a character that wants something very badly and is willing to sacrifice and overcome conflicts in order to get it. Miller himself was not active. He spent little time with others. He watched excessive amounts of TV, and as an author, made up fictional characters who were living lives more interesting than his own. Analyzing his own life, Miller said that he knew he was living an unremarkable life because he was not willing to face conflict, and without courage, he was an unwilling victim instead of a grateful participant. Like the tiger Mohini, because he was afraid of his own demons, he paced about in his self-imposed cage, resisting any growth or change. He was like an unwritten Holocaust memorial book in a nameless library. His real-life story had those unwritten pages. Perhaps some of us are like Donald Miller, stuck in our status quo, avoiding challenges or simply accepting less than we should. Miller explained that as a general rule in writing stories, the characters don't want to change, they must be forced to change. People fear change because even if their situations may be terrible, at least they have a sense of control when they know what to expect. The secret of facing change, then, is to be daring, to take risks, and to not be afraid. And listening to his own advice, Miller finally jumped in, and even though he was not in good shape, he joined a group raising money for a cause, and he hiked the Inca Trail in Peru. Can you imagine doing something like that? One moment you are averse to physical activity, and only weeks later you are hiking the Inca Trail. Now that is a way of writing a new story. This is how Miller described the end of his adventure. We didn't hike to the Sun Gate the next morning, we ran. We ran on blistered feet and sore legs. We got there and it was fogged in, so we sat along the rocks on the ruins and waited for the fog to burn off. We sat and sang songs. You can take a bus to Machu Picchu and hike a little ways to the Sun Gate, but the people who took the bus didn't experience the city as we did. The pain made the city more beautiful. The story of our hiking together made us different characters than we would have been if we had skipped the story and showed up ending using an easier way. Each of us can live the life we want to live. Donald Miller observed that people give up on their own stories because it is harder than they ever thought it would be. But a friend told him when something hard happens to you, you have two choices. You either get bitter or you get better. Do you know how old Abraham was when God told him, Lech lecha, to get up and go? 75. 75. God said to Abraham and Sarah, go forth from your land, from your birthplace, from everything you know and everything that's comfortable. It's time to write a new chapter in your story. A whole section on self-discovery, even at an age when he might have thought such was not possible. God was saying to him, leave everything behind, everything that is holding you back, everything that you thought was truth. And the secret to embarking on a life and a journey of living and writing a new chapter is to follow that example, to recognize that all of our lives can be more exciting and more meaningful if we choose for them to be so. By asking the questions and taking time to find the answers, we discover our true selves and our potential and our inner power. On this Rosh Hashanah, I am encouraging you and myself to take risks, to find courage, to write the next chapter in our lives, to bring a sense of accomplishment and purpose to what we are doing. The poet Ralph Waldo Emerson said, do not be too timid and squeamish about your actions. All life is an experiment, and the more experiments you make, the better. Kodvenu b'sefer ha'chayim, melech hafetz b'chayim. God, with your help, let us write good stories in our book of life, and grant us blessing and peace and sustenance. May we be remembered and inscribed, we and all your people, and all God's people everywhere, for a good, healthy, and prosperous, and a peaceful life. Kain yehi ratzon, may it be God's will, and let us say, Amen. We turn now to the Chatzi Kaddish on page 123, which precedes the Musaf Amidah, and I'll invite you to rise, page 123.